So you look at what are the big policies that matter, keeping ESG out of pension systems, as we've talked about, enhancing economic freedom, protecting parents and children with the rights to educate the children and have the very best outcomes for them that they have. So we have dozens of policy solutions just released this week, and state legislators are here. We've got more than 250 state legislators here this week in Scottsdale, Hugh, and they're putting out their own priorities for the year. This is a great roadmap, obviously.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt live at the American Legislative Exchange Council, National Policy and State Solutions. I'm joined by my favorite tax economist here on the left, Jonathan Williams. You can follow him on X, site formerly known as Twitter, at Tax Economist. Now, I don't know who came up with his handle, because I'm not sure everyone is going to rush to go to Tax Economist.
Why wouldn't they?
But I want you to hear that. He's actually very funny, very friendly, very accessible, and he's the genius behind richstatespoorstates.org. And before we go to this, 2024 Essential Policy Solutions, I want to know, when is the update on richstatespoorstates.org coming out?
Well, right before the favorite day of the year for liberal Democrats and progressives across the country, Tax Day, right? That's their holiday. We come out just before that. So just only in the week before Tax Day every year, Hugh.
I don't know if you've heard me talking on the show. Since ALEC is my sponsor, I always remind people to go to richstatespoorstates.org. And I told them, and I hope I didn't mislead them, they can go as often as they want and they get as many copies as they want. It's a great Christmas present for relatives that you really don't like that much and are living in blue states. Give them Rich States Poorstates. They'll think you bought them a book. It's for free, right? And now tonight is the debate between Governor DeSantis of Florida and Governor Newsom of California on the Sean Hannity show at 9:00. What would you now? What's the ranking? Florida's number 2, right?
Number 1 in economic performance, though, as Governor DeSantis always likes to remind us.
But right? Number 2 in your ranking, behind Utah.
Yep, always in the top 10.
Always in the top. And California's at the bottom. And you don't even include crime.
That's right.
All right. So what would you ask if you were Sean to these two governors?
Well, with Governor DeSantis, it's what's next, right? Because you've checked up all these incredible freedom-enhancing policies. Florida is one of those 9 states without a personal income tax to start. So this whole tax cutting revolution that we've been talking about over the last 3 legislative sessions, where we've had 23 states substantially cut their personal income taxes, Florida didn't have one to start with. So, they're already there. They've already been cutting regulations. They've already been doing so many of the things that really enhance economic opportunity and help small business. So I think that I would ask Governor DeSantis, what's next on the freedom-loving agenda to continue this progress in the state of Florida that's been gaining nearly 1,000 people per day from the other 49 states?
Jonathan, I would open up. I just did the presidential debate, and I always believe in short questions. So I'd ask him, let's start with your highest marginal tax rate. We're just going to run down some comparison stats. What is your highest marginal tax rate, Governor Newsom? What is your highest marginal income tax rate, Governor DeSantis? What is your budget deficit this year? What is your budget deficit this year? What is the average cost of housing in your state? What is the average cost of housing in your state? I think that if we go with actual comparison, California gets crushed.
Right. Exactly. 13.3% top marginal income tax rate in California versus the right flat tax, which is 0, right? Big comparison, right? Then the other thing I would ask Governor Newsom, Hugh, I think the most important thing is, why is it, Governor Newsom, that you claim that there's this California economic success that's a laugh line in most parts of the country? Why is it then that 300,000+ Americans in the last 12 months have voted with their feet and left California and gone to one of the other 49 states?
I tell everyone every day, I gave myself an 8% pay hike when I moved from California to Virginia. Now, the marginal rate should not be 5.5% in Virginia. It's too high. Tennessee gets jobs and Virginia doesn't get jobs. That's because it's 0 in Tennessee. It's 5.5% in Virginia. But it's a world of difference from California and New York and the other high tax states. Now, let's turn to 2024 Essential Policy Solutions, which Jonathan brought to me this morning. What is this and what do you do with it, Jonathan?
Well, brand new this week, Hugh, this is a guide for state legislators as they've come to us with their recommendations for what are the free market policies that are working. You're going to talk to some great state legislators throughout the course of this week. You've already talked to many, the ones that are cutting taxes, reducing red tape across the United States, empowering individual workers with right to work and freedom-enhancing policies on labor. And then I think the biggest issue out there that, we've talked about many times, it's a huge priority for ALEC and our education work on empowering parental rights, right, and school choice. So you look at what are the big policies that matter, keeping ESG out of pension systems, as we've talked about, enhancing economic freedom, protecting parents and children with the rights to educate the children and have the very best outcomes for them that they have. So we have dozens of policy solutions just released this week, and state legislators are here. We've got more than 250 state legislators here this week in Scottsdale, Hugh, and they're putting out their own priorities for the year. This is a great roadmap. Obviously, not everything's applicable to every state, but it's an incredible free market, freedom enhancing agenda for state legislators across the country.
I want to cover three. One of them is particularly relevant to Northern Virginia, where I live, because both Arlington County and the city of Alexandria have adopted increased density. Now, as an old land use lawyer, I'm always in favor of more density because the housing market needs more density. There's scarcity in housing, but they added an equity element to it, which I worry about, Jonathan. When you see increased density and equity, is that an alarm bell for you?
Well, I'm kind of an old-fashioned, economist in this sense, Hugh, in that, it's all about supply and demand, right? And providing people that new supply of housing that will actually reduce prices. I mean, we've seen this huge run up because of a restriction in supply in so many markets across the country. And so much of this is driven by things outside of the market, right? By these diversity inclusion efforts, by ESG, DEI, all of these, liberal acronyms. And I mean, this is something that's been choking off affordable housing across the country. And that's exactly one of the priorities that we have in this new publication, is looking at free market ways to solve this crisis. And of course, another one of those, Hugh, is the property tax problem, with assessments going up all across the country. One of our most successful pieces of ALEC model policy over the last several years has been our truth in taxation policy, to actually hold local elected officials who are spending way too much taxpayer money accountable, and actually have a real discussion about why is property tax burden is going up all across the country. And of course, in Virginia, as you know, Hugh, not just on real estate, but on our cars. I mean, these are, huge burdens for taxpayers across the country.
Now, I want to talk about one thing you in here, school security. I had dinner a couple of weeknights ago with former Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, who pioneered the STOP order, severe threat order of protection. Those are not a red flag law. It's where someone has been identified as just mentally broken for whatever reason. Hopefully they can be repaired. What is the school security model policy that you've got? Because I'm seeing here, everybody wants one. Nobody knows what to do, Jonathan.
Well, I mean, so obviously the first thing is address the safety issue while protecting Second Amendment rights of law-abiding Americans, right? And one of the great new things I think that we've seen from an ALEC perspective is some of our private sector partners, former law enforcement, former military officials that are coming up with great imaging technology, for instance, to stop potential shooters or folks that would do harm in schools before they can actually even get in, because of the real-time monitoring that's available through video and other technology. And so I think it's a great new way to say, yes, we need to enhance school security, but we also need to protect the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding Americans at the same time. And so I think technology is a huge way that we can get to this solution that's really needed across red states and blue states alike.
Now, Jonathan, I've got grandkids, and John Haidt, who's a man of the left, is one of my favorite social scientists. He says phones should be banned from schools, at least until they're 16 years old. He has persuaded me that the data is overwhelming. There's a new policy here, social media and youth online safety. How are you different from John Haidt about phones and platforms in schools?
Well, we haven't gotten there yet, but there's been discussions this week on that issue of phones in schools. I mean, that's, I think, going to be a legitimate policy debate across states, and it's probably going to be one that we're going to be having at ALEC. As you know, Hugh, 50 years of ALEC. We have 900 plus pieces of model legislation on our website for folks to check out. It's a good Christmas present. If you don't get the publications, you can always get somebody a model piece of legislation. Right?
900 models? I mean, you've done that, 900 of them?
Not in this book, but on the ALEC website, we have ALEC current policies across 900 different policy areas. And so I fully expect in the next year, Hugh, we're going to be taking this up and certainly discussing it.
You've also got protecting individual liberty, campus speech, online speech, and consumer data privacy, judicial reform. I know what that is. Appoint good judges. how did this go over? This is brand new. And where do people get this?
ALEC.org. It's a great spot to download it for free. It's Hugh, and it's been a huge hit this week. And we've had legislators actually here with us on site, texting it back to all of their colleagues that couldn't make it out to Scottsdale this week, and others requesting hard copies to go back. So I think we're going to run out of hard copies this week.
You've got one of Robert O'Brien, the former national security advisor, very dear friend of mine, and one of his colleagues in the private sector is working on grid, survivability, and security. And he told me he was going to talk to you folks about the grid. Did he make sense to you?
Absolutely. Yes. That's the area that we're certainly concerned with. I mean, everyone could be concerned with what's happening, both with just domestic terrorist attacks on the grid, but then just organized, folks from communist China, for instance, and other adversaries across the globe. This is something that is absolutely as part of the policy priorities this year. And as we talk to legislators, you're hearing more and more about that as well.
Now, in terms of policing, have you got model policies on police funding, police and rules of engagement? Because police have drawn back a little bit because they're getting sued left, right, and center. And the results in Washington, D.C., both Jonathan and I are near the Beltway. And we know now you got to be careful where you drive in the Beltway because they've inside DC because they've actually collapsed their policing program.
Absolutely. I mean, you got to be careful where you park your car in Washington D.C. with the thousands of carjackings that have happened. I mean,
the president's granddaughter.
In members of Congress, unfortunately, and it's we've had Congressman Cuellar from South Texas at gunpoint get carjacked just this fall in Washington D.C. So the ALEC approach to this is obviously prosecute violent criminals and also then work for ways to rehabilitate folks after nonviolent offenders have served their sentences, right? And so obviously the one big thing in Northern Virginia that we've faced, and we actually electorally, the far left Soros-funded prosecutor in Loudoun County, just west of Washington, D.C., just lost her reelection, even as Virginia Republicans are not doing well on the ballot across the board, as you know, Hugh.
We don't live in Loudoun, a big issue. But when the Loudoun prosecutor is letting people go anywhere and they're not putting them in jail and they're not prosecuting, they affect all of Virginia.
So it doesn't work in Loudoun County. It may work in Arlington and some of the other more liberal jurisdictions, but I think there is a limit to this craziness when it comes to the Soros.
I don't think, I'm interested, Jonathan. We will see a cycle ahead. I believe crime is going to become an issue in the 2024 campaign in the way that crime was an issue in 68 and 72. Do you agree with that?
I think that's probably right. I think it
is.
Do
you calculate the impact of crime? I know it's not in richstatespoorstates.org. Jonathan, I got to go because I've got to go to my friend, Brett Rasmussen, Solera, Best Talk Grills has got an ad coming up. Let me ask you in terms of the next time Rich States, Poor States come out, do you have time to tweak it at all?
Yeah, always do.
Okay, because I think you ought to include the rankings of the number one team in the state. Now, Ohio State is in the top 4, and they're going to be in the playoffs. So I think you ought to add in there, if they've got college football finalists, they ought to get a little bump.
Well, as a Michigander, I'm up for that.
Oh, you brutal man. I thought you would let it go. No, you had to bring up the game. Jonathan Williams, find him at Tax Economist. Go and get this and give a listen to my friend, Brett Rasmussen. And let me tell you about Solera Best Talk Grills.